In 1904, the world watched as one of the most formidable empires on Earth was brought to its knees. A sprawling, colossal power, feared for its military might and its absolute ruler, was humbled in a stunning, catastrophic defeat. But this defeat wasn't delivered by a rival empire's grand army or the strategy of some celebrated military genius. No. The architect of this collapse was a single man, sitting in a quiet office in New York City, armed with little more than a checkbook and a white-hot, burning desire for revenge. This is the incredible story of how a brilliant Jewish-American banker, a titan of Wall Street, observed the Russian Empire brutalize his people and decided that enough was enough. He couldn't command armies or launch warships himself, but he wielded a different kind of power, one that was just as potent. By funding Russia's enemy in a massive and bloody war, he executed a financial masterstroke that would not only chasten a czar and shake a centuries-old dynasty to its core, but would forever alter the course of world history. This isn't just a story about geopolitical conflict. It's a story about the awesome, terrifying power of finance when it is forged into a weapon. This is the story of Jacob Schiff and his sweet, perfectly calculated retribution. The Prison of the Pale. To truly grasp what drove Jacob Schiff to such an audacious act, you first have to understand the world that lit the fuse inside him. At the dawn of the 20th century, the Russian Empire, under the absolute and often inept rule of Tsar Nicholas II, was a picture of imposing power. It stretched across 11 time zones, a colossal nation of immense natural resources, and a seemingly endless supply of soldiers. But beneath this veneer of strength lay a deeply rotten core. For millions of the Tsar's subjects, this empire was not a homeland, it was a prison. And for no group was this more true than for Russia's 5 million Jews. For centuries, Jewish people in Russia were the targets of systemic, state-sanctioned persecution. They were largely confined by law to a specific territory in the western part of the empire known as the Pale of Settlement. This vast area, stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, was not some protective enclave. It was the largest ghetto in the world, designed for segregation, control, and economic strangulation. Inside the Pale, Jews lived as second-class citizens, perpetually crushed by a mountain of discriminatory laws. These regulations dictated every facet of their existence, restricting where they could travel, which schools they could attend, whether they could own land, or what professions they were allowed to practice. They were the empire's designated scapegoats, a convenient, ever-present target for a paranoid regime that often bolstered its power through fear and division. The atmosphere was one of constant, suffocating dread, a low-level terror that was punctuated by horrific, explosive waves of organized violence known as pogroms. The word itself, pogrom, is a chillingly direct Russian term. It means to demolish, to wreak havoc, to destroy violently. These were not spontaneous riots or simple mob anger. The pogroms were a semi-official tool of the state, often tolerated and sometimes even encouraged by the authorities. Imperial police forces would stand by passively, or in some cases even join in, as drunken mobs, incited by vicious anti-Semitic propaganda, descended upon Jewish towns and villages, known as shtetls. Fueled by vodka and hatred, they would loot shops, burn homes to the ground, and inflict unspeakable violence on innocent men, women, and children. For the Jews of the Russian Empire, life was a fragile thing, lived always in the shadow of the next outburst. The Kishinev Catalyst. This grim reality persisted for decades, a slow-burning fire of misery. But in April of 1903, an act of such profound brutality, an act so utterly depraved, sent a shockwave of horror across the entire globe. It happened in the city of Kishinev, the capital of modern-day Moldova. The kindling for the fire had been laid for weeks. A local anti-Semitic newspaper, funded by the state, relentlessly printed inflammatory headlines like "Death to the Jews" and "Crusade against the hated race." Just before the Orthodox Easter holiday, two local tragedies, the death of a Christian child and the suicide at a local hospital, were cynically and deliberately twisted into the ancient, poisonous lie of the blood libel, the medieval accusation that Jews ritually murder Christian children to use their blood in religious ceremonies. The lie, absurd and monstrous, spread through the city like a contagion. On Easter Sunday, as church bells rang out to celebrate the resurrection of Christ, the violence began.
What started with roving gangs of teenagers harassing Jewish people on the street quickly and deliberately exploded into a full-blown massacre. For 2 terrifying days, the city of Kishinev was plunged into a medieval nightmare in the heart of the modern age. Mobs, armed with axes, knives, and heavy crowbars, swarmed the Jewish quarter with a terrifying sense of purpose. The New York Times, reporting on smuggled first-hand accounts from the city, published descriptions of a scene from hell, describing a city where babes were literally torn to pieces by the frenzied and bloodthirsty mob. When the violence finally exhausted itself, the devastation was absolute. Nearly 50 Jews were dead. Hundreds upon hundreds more were gravely injured, many maimed for life. Over 1,500 homes, shops, and businesses were plundered and utterly destroyed. The stories that emerged were stomach-churning. Victims were bludgeoned, disemboweled, and had nails driven into their skulls. Their bodies were defiled in the streets. The Kishinev pogrom was not just a riot. It was an act of unrestrained barbarism, a message from the Tsarist state to its Jewish population, and the world was forced to watch. The banker's rage. Thousands of miles away, on the bustling streets of Wall Street, one man read these horrifying reports not with a sense of distant, charitable pity, but with a cold, clarifying, and burning rage. His name was Jacob Henry Schiff. Born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1847 to a distinguished rabbinical family that traced its lineage back centuries, Schiff had emigrated to the United States just after the Civil War. He was a man of formidable intellect, possessing a razor-sharp mind for finance and a relentless, unyielding ambition. Through a combination of talent and drive, he quickly rose to become the senior partner of one of Wall Street's most powerful and prestigious investment banks, Kuhn Loeb & Company. Under his visionary leadership, the firm became a primary engine of American industrialization, famously financing the sprawling railroad empires of men like E.H. Harriman, and in doing so, physically weaving the fabric of a modern nation. Schiff was, by any measure, a titan of his era. He was a trusted advisor to presidents, a philanthropist on an epic scale, and a man whose decisions could move global markets. He lived in a palatial mansion on Fifth Avenue, a veritable prince of America's Gilded Age. But Jacob Schiff never, ever forgot where he came from. He was, arguably, the foremost Jewish leader of his time, and he used his immense wealth and influence as both a shield to protect his people and a sword to fight for their rights. For Schiff, the news from Kishinev was not a remote tragedy. It was a deeply personal wound. He saw the Tsar's regime for exactly what it was, what he would later call the enemy of mankind. For years, he had watched with growing fury as Russia borrowed vast sums of money from Western banks, using that very capital to finance and strengthen the oppressive system that murdered his people. The pogrom at Kishinev was the final breaking point. It solidified in his mind a clear and unshakable conviction. This brutal anti-Semitic regime had to be weakened, it had to be humbled, and if possible, it had to be broken. He didn't know how or when this could be accomplished, but from that moment on, Jacob Schiff was no longer just a banker. He was a man waiting for an opportunity. He was waiting for his chance to get revenge.
An unlikely alliance. That opportunity arrived with stunning speed, less than a year later, in February 1904. On the other side of the world, two empires with competing visions of the future collided. The Russian Empire, seeking to expand its influence and secure a warm water port in the Far East, ran headfirst into the rising empire of Japan, a nation with its own fierce ambitions for regional dominance. The Russian-Japanese War was on. On paper, the conflict looked like a tragic joke. Russia was the lumbering Goliath, a great European power with a massive army and a legendary reputation. Japan was the David, a small island nation that had only recently, within the last 50 years, emerged from centuries of feudal isolation. Almost every Western observer, and especially the supremely arrogant Tsar Nicholas II, who smugly referred to the Japanese as yellow monkeys, expected a swift and decisive Russian victory. But modern wars are not just fought by soldiers in the field. They are fought with rifles, with battleships, with artillery, and with endless streams of supplies. In short, they are fought with money, cold, hard cash, and the Empire of Japan was running desperately low on it. To have any hope of standing against a giant like Russia, Japan needed to purchase modern warships from Great Britain and an endless supply of munitions from Germany. It needed a colossal injection of foreign capital. The Japanese government dispatched one of its top financial diplomats, Takahashi Korekiyo, on a mission of existential importance: to travel the world and convince the planet's most powerful bankers to bet on the underdog. His first stop was London, the undisputed center of global finance. He was met with polite handshakes and then promptly shown the door. The city's bankers were all too aware that loaning money to Japan would infuriate the Tsar, and antagonizing the Russian Empire was simply bad business. Why take a massive risk by backing a small, unproven Asian nation in a fight it was almost certain to lose? Frustrated, dejected, and on the brink of total failure, Takahashi figured his mission was a bust and Japan's fate was sealed. Then, one evening at a formal dinner in London, fate intervened. He found himself seated next to a quiet, imposing, and intensely serious American banker who was visiting from New York. That banker was Jacob Schiff. Takahashi, seeing nothing to lose, laid it all out: his critical mission, his fears for his country, the string of rejections. He explained with raw honesty that without a major loan, and soon, the Japanese war effort would collapse. Schiff listened intently, his expression unreadable, but his mind racing. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the instrument of his revenge served up to him at a dinner party. For Jacob Schiff, this was never just about a business transaction. Yes, as a shrewd banker, he recognized Japan's potential and its determination, but his primary motivation was far more profound, far more personal. As his own daughter later explained, it wasn't so much his interest in Japan, but his hatred of Imperial Russia and its anti-Semitic policies that prompted him to take this great financial risk. In Takahashi's desperation, Schiff saw a unique, once-in-a-lifetime chance to strike a powerful blow against the regime responsible for the horrors of Kishinev. He looked at the desperate Japanese envoy and didn't just see a client, he saw an ally. After dinner, Schiff arranged a private meeting. The next day, he made his position crystal clear. His firm, Kuhn Loeb & Co., would not only participate, but would lead the international effort to sell Japanese war bonds on Wall Street. He was putting his money, and far more importantly, his colossal reputation on the line for Japan. He told Takahashi directly that the Russian government was the enemy of all Jews, and he would welcome the chance to strike back against it. The weaponization of finance. With Jacob Schiff's legendary name attached to the project, doors that had been slammed shut in Takahashi's face were suddenly thrown wide open. Schiff's reputation for financial acumen and integrity was the golden key that unlocked American finance. Back in New York, Schiff began to assemble what could only be described as a financial army, convincing powerful banks that had previously turned Takahashi away to join his syndicate. He masterfully argued the case not just as a sound investment in a determined nation, but as a moral imperative. The result was an astonishing, world-altering financial package. Through a series of 4 massive bond issues, Schiff and his partners raised a staggering $200 million for Japan. In today's money, that figure is well over $5 billion. It was a sum so vast, it completely shocked the financial world and dwarfed anything anyone thought was possible. This single series of loans, organized by one man, driven by a quest for justice, would end up providing a critical portion, nearly half of Japan's entire war funds. It was the very first time that Japanese bonds had ever been sold on the American market, a seismic shift in the geography of global finance.
Schiff brilliantly framed the purchase of these war bonds as more than a financial transaction. It was a moral and political act, a way for ordinary people to personally join the fight against the oppressive Tsarist regime. While the bonds were sold broadly to institutional investors and the general public, the cause resonated with profound depth inside the American Jewish community. In New York, when one of the bond issues went on sale at Kuhn, Loeb & Co.'s office, the line of eager investors stretched down the block and around the corner. They weren't just buying bonds. They were buying a piece of the fight against the Tsar. Schiff had forged the financial weapon. The war chest was now full to bursting. Now, it was time to see what that money could buy on the battlefield. The fall of the giant. The massive influx of capital organized by Jacob Schiff had an immediate, profound, and decisive effect. It was like a powerful shot of adrenaline injected directly into the heart of the Japanese war machine. With billions of dollars in today's money suddenly at its disposal, Japan could now fund its military on a scale that no one, least of all the Russians, had ever thought possible. That money was immediately put to use, buying the very best weapons the era had to offer, state-of-the-art battleships from British shipyards, and massive quantities of advanced German artillery and rifles. While the enormous Russian military was plagued by systemic corruption, outdated equipment, and logistical nightmares, the Japanese forces were getting better equipped, better trained, and better supplied with each passing day. The tide of the war turned with dramatic and brutal speed. In January 1905, the heavily fortified Russian stronghold of Port Arthur, the prize they coveted, fell to the Japanese after a long and bloody siege. It was a huge strategic victory that sent shockwaves around the world. Then in March, the Japanese forces won a crushing, decisive victory at the Battle of Mukden. It was one of the largest land battles the world had ever seen, involving over 600,000 troops, and it ended in a humiliating Russian retreat. But the most spectacular and humiliating blow was yet to come. In a desperate, last-ditch gamble, the Tsar had dispatched Russia's Baltic fleet on an epic 7-month, 18,000-mile journey around the entire globe to reach the Pacific and turn the tide. It was Russia's last great hope. In May of 1905, as the aging, exhausted, and poorly maintained Russian fleet entered the Tsushima Strait between Korea and Japan, the modern, well-drilled Japanese Navy, captained by the brilliant Admiral Togo Heihachiro and funded in large part by Jacob Schiff's loans, was waiting for them. The Battle of Tsushima wasn't a battle, it was an annihilation. It was a clinical, merciless execution at sea. In less than 24 hours, the superior speed,
gunnery, and tactics of the Japanese fleet resulted in the destruction of nearly the entire Russian fleet. It was one of the most lopsided and decisive naval victories in all of history, and it served as the final, brutal nail in the coffin of Russia's war effort. Defeated on land and utterly shattered at sea, the Tsar had no choice but to sue for peace. The war officially ended in September 1905 with the signing of the Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. Japan was the undisputed victor. For the first time in the modern era, a non-European nation had decisively defeated a great European power. Japan had arrived as a major player on the world stage, and the Russian Empire was left broken and humiliated.
A complicated legacy. The consequences for Russia were catastrophic. The profound national humiliation of the defeat, combined with the immense economic strain of the war, shattered the centuries-old myth of the Tsar's divine power and competence. Widespread discontent, which had been simmering for years, finally boiled over, culminating in the violent upheavals of the Russian Revolution of 1905. Events like Bloody Sunday, where peaceful protesters were gunned down by the Tsar's troops, and widespread civil unrest forced a terrified Nicholas II to grant limited civil liberties and create Russia's first ever parliament, the Duma. It was the first major crack in the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty. The financial blow that Schiff was so instrumental in dealing to Russia's war effort helped trigger a political earthquake. It was one of many complex factors that would ultimately lead, just over a decade later, to the complete collapse of the Russian Empire in 1917. For his part, Jacob Schiff was celebrated as a hero in Japan. He was invited to Tokyo, where he was received with the highest honors. In a personal audience, Emperor Meiji awarded him the Order of the Rising Sun, the second highest honor that could be bestowed in the entire nation. The Jewish banker from Wall Street had humbled an emperor and helped forge a new world power. On the surface, his revenge was complete and spectacularly successful. But history is rarely that neat, and success often comes with unintended consequences. While Schiff's plan to weaken the Tsarist regime worked beyond his wildest dreams, the immediate aftermath for the very people he sought to help was tragic. In the chaos and instability following the war, the weakened and desperate regime lashed out at its favorite scapegoat with renewed fury. A new, even more brutal and widespread wave of pogroms swept across the Pale of Settlement as the government sought to deflect the public's anger over the defeat onto the Jewish population. It is also critically important to address and debunk a pernicious myth that grew from these events. A deeply anti-Semitic conspiracy theory alleging that Schiff and other Jewish bankers later went on to finance the Bolshevik Revolution. This is an absolute falsehood. Jacob Schiff was a staunch capitalist and was vehemently anti-communist. He celebrated when the Tsar was overthrown in the liberal February Revolution of 1917 and enthusiastically supported the provisional government that took over, precisely because one of its first acts was to grant full and equal civil rights to Russia's Jews. When Lenin and the Bolsheviks seized power in the October Revolution, Schiff was appalled by their tyranny and totalitarian ideology, and he immediately cut off all support and ties. The lie that he financed communism is a baseless slander born from the very same anti-Semitic poison he had fought against his entire life. Jacob Schiff's legacy is as complex as it is monumental. He demonstrated, perhaps more clearly than anyone before him, that international finance could be wielded as an incredibly powerful weapon of geopolitical change. His remarkable story shows that a single individual, armed with enough capital, conviction, and courage, could influence the outcome of wars and alter the destiny of empires. He set out with a clear goal: to punish a hateful regime for its crimes against his people. In doing so, he not only succeeded, but also inadvertently helped catapult Japan onto the world stage and significantly hastened the downfall of Tsarist Russia.
It is a profound and unsettling reminder that behind the cold, abstract numbers of global finance, there is often a very human story of passion, of ambition, and sometimes of a burning, unquenchable desire for justice. His story forces us to consider the immense power held by those who control the flow of capital, both in his time and in ours. If you found this story of financial revenge compelling, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden histories that reveal the forces shaping our world. And it leaves us with a difficult question. In a world still rife with conflict and injustice, who are the Jacob Schiffs of today? And can money, when wielded as a weapon, ever truly be a force for lasting, uncomplicated justice? Let us know what you think in the comments below.